Thank you for listening to the ThePPod from the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership. Please note, due to the nature of this podcast, themes relating to the abuse and neglect of children are discussed, with the content being designed for an adult audience for educational purposes in order to protect children from harm. Therefore, listener discretion is advised and the content unsuitable for children.
Welcome to the ThePPod.
Right then, welcome back to the ThePPod, the partnership podcast from the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership. And I'm really pleased once again to be joined by a friend of the show, Jackie Webb, our motivational interviewing trainer. So Jackie, welcome back. It's been a little while since we spoke last, so it's great to have you back here.
Well, thanks for having me again.
No, not at all. It's great. And it's been a little, we were talking just before we started, it's been a little while since we recorded one. So how are you doing? What have you been up to work-wise?
Well, obviously still doing some one-day training for Somerset Safeguarding Children's Partnership. Still doing some 3-day courses for Somerset Council Children's Services. But also quite a lot with a couple of organisations nationwide through the Tavistock Clinic, such as CGL, Change, Grow, Live. So they're an organisation that operate around the country, and they're training all staff in motivational interviewing and trauma-informed approaches. So I'm working with a little team training those all over the place. Also, We Are With You, so a drug and alcohol service people might be familiar with. Again, they're all over the country. So again, with a little team of us, we've been offering training to staff there. So another thing that seems to be picking up a lot, I've noticed, is people asking for MI supervision. So I've been getting quite busy offering MI supervision as well.
Okay. Why do you think that is? Is it sort of because it's becoming more of a known approach, or?
Well, I think it's always been recommended as a way of really improving your MI practice. Certainly the way I think I improved, sort of that kind of big shift happens when you really start to explore things on an individual basis. So, I mean, obviously group supervision is really helpful, but that one-to-one with somebody who knows a bit more about MI than you do can be really valuable to improve practice. And so, yeah, I've been asked for quite a few supervision sessions recently, so it's quite interesting.
Interesting. So
yeah.
Actually, that kind of links in with something quite nicely that we were thinking about talking about today, and it's about how do we really kind of learn, how do we kind of embed MI? Because we've talked a bit about before, the principles of MI, some of the techniques within it, some of the sort of difficulties with it, some of the challenges, having some of those challenging conversations, and thought it might be useful today to sort of talk about actually how do we start to really kind of learn and embed this. And I think the phrase that you came up with was being MI versus sort of doing MI. So I thought that if you're up for that, we'll explore that today a bit.
That sounds good. Yeah.
I think MI is sometimes one of those things that seems very straightforward, very common sense on the surface.
Yeah.
But when people really sort of start to get into it in practice, can actually find it's quite challenging, isn't it?
Yeah. Definitely. And that can make people give up, actually, because I think it really challenges us personally. If we're in a helping profession and we feel like we're a good listener, and then we come to an approach like MI, for some people, they kind of go, oh, yeah, I've got lots to learn and are really open to it. For other people, quite, I can really see why it would really challenge some people to think, actually, perhaps I'm not as good a listener as I thought I was. And kind of that really good, really deep, purposeful, active listening being at the heart of what we have to master first before we can do the more strategic aspects of MI. And often people can see the value in responding to change talk and the things that move people towards change and want to get there and want to be doing that. But of course, if the active listening skills are still a little bit kind of sketchy, that is going to be near impossible, really, to be able to do the strategic aspects of MI. There's a quote from Bill Miller, one of the founders of Motivational Interviewing, and he says that learning MI is not an event, it's a process. So the event being turning up to a training course. So often the learning starts with turning up to a training course, but you're only really learning the basics. The development of your learning and mastery of the approach only happens outside of the training room when you go back to real life. And the nice thing I think about MI when you embrace it is that the person you're talking to is your teacher. If you're being responsive and you're really paying attention to the impact of what is happening, what you're doing in the conversation and the impact, and then reflecting upon it, and then perhaps doing it a bit differently next time as a result of that, that's how you learn, through reflection and then putting into practice consciously and deliberately and preparing for that, actually. So this isn't an approach that happens by accident. So often people say, I think I might be doing it already. It's not true. This is something that we really need to consciously get ready for. Otherwise, what we tend to do is listen long enough to solve the problem rather than listen to understand.
Thank you for that, because I think that probably frames a lot of what we're going to talk about today. But I just wonder, can you sort of take us back a little bit, because you've been practicing MI since mid-90s, I want to say?
1995, I first, I had a 4-day introduction when I was a probation officer.
Right.
And that was, I think quite often I talk to other MI enthusiasts and other trainers, and there's something that happens, and I see it in the training room sometimes for some individuals, where there's almost a sense of finding the approach that fits for you. This is how I want to practice. And that's what happened for me. So I first was introduced to it in 1995, but I am still learning new things every time I deliver a training course because of the nature of MI. You never stop learning and developing the skills. It's an ongoing practice.
So when you first started then, and like you say, you had that moment, I think we talked about this in our first episode, you had that moment when you went, this clicks, this works for me, I understand this, and this is how this embraces sort of my approach. So you went on a 4-day course. What happened from there? What made the difference for you from that sort of initial enthusiasm, say this is for me, to really kind of learning it and starting to embed it on a personal level?
Yeah, so I think there are several things. One is that determination to get better was a conscious decision. So then the reading, so understanding it on a much deeper level rather than just, attending a training course. So really taking time to do reading and understand it. There were development groups offered, which I attended. And of course, if you're going to turn up to a development group, you want to go with something. So that kind of knowing that I was going made me do it. So as in made me think about with who I was going to try it out and who I was going to reflect on the impact and those kind of things. So consciously getting ready. So rather than just thinking, I think I did it then, planning, okay, which, I've got this person I'm going to talk to about something, maybe their drug use or their offending. What will help me in this conversation to stay MI? So getting ready for that. As I went forward, though, with my own personal journey in MI, I think one of the things that led to quite an acceleration in my development was when I had an MI mentor, so somebody who offered me supervision. So that was when I worked for KDAS, the Drug and Alcohol Service in Dorset. And she was the clinical psychologist there, and she was already an MI trainer. And she kind of spotted that I was using MI and then encouraged that and offered one-to-one supervision. And that was how she then asked me to co-train with her, and it all went from there, really. But I think that one-to-one supervision, that where you're just focusing on your MI, not cases or anything else, but actually your development of your MI practice, that was incredibly valuable.
So is that the sort of work that you were just talking about a moment ago that you're doing more of now? Is that supervision focusing on MI?
Yes, and the interesting thing is, of course, is that as you deliver supervision, you're staying in an MI approach. So the development of people in supervision isn't an expert saying, well, what you need to do is this, but actually to use MI as an approach to help the person think about what they need to develop. So it's exactly the same approach, MI supervision, as having an MI conversation about any other sort of change or development. And for people who've had training recently, you'll be aware of the change in definition of MI, which has now included the word growth. So we're not just talking to people about change, we're also looking at development. So it really fits nicely with learning and developing and embedding MI to have a conversation where that person is staying in an MI style.
It's quite a development in it, quite over time, because like you say, you can come on a course. We've made it clear previously that the one-day course through the Safeguarding Children Partnership is not, you're not going to go do that, come out an expert and be one. It's very much an introduction, but people, it's about, I think for me, getting that understanding. And also, like you say, that sort of spark, if you like.
Yeah.
Just go, actually, this makes a lot of sense.
And I want more. I'm curious now about this approach. That's my aim often is to create the curiosity to learn and develop rather than feel like I know everything I need to know. Often people go away with one or two things that they're going to start with. That's an amazing. If people can even just be a bit more aware of that urge to fix and solve, or awareness of asking fewer questions and listening more, that can often make such a big difference. And people notice that straight away. And the conversations feel different and they feel better about them. And the person that they're talking to often goes away feeling better about them. And that can often encourage the person to develop. So
you obviously do a lot of, as we talked about at the start, a lot of training and to lots of different organisations around the place, around the country. I know, talking to you, there are some areas that you work in, you think, wow, this is really flying, this is really doing well. Other areas where you're thinking, okay, there's some development work to do there. And what would you say sort of makes the difference in terms of somebody coming on a course to then really taking that forward, that MI approach forward, and really sort of embedding it to practice? What would you sort of say are some of the things they do or don't do to really support that?
Well, all the things I said about what the individual does obviously applies, because without that individual motivation to want to do something different in their approach, those MI conversations that happen behind closed doors in people's living rooms or in classrooms or wherever it is won't happen. But what seems to make a huge difference is where an organisation is embracing the approach from the top down rather than managers sort of taking a ground up approach, which doesn't tend to be effective. I've noticed it takes a lot longer. It feels like wading through treacle when managers are reluctant to have the training themselves.
Yeah, we mentioned earlier, water doesn't flow uphill, does it? And it's so we've got that sort of organisational approach, which I agree is absolutely key to this. I know within an organisation, have you seen things that people have adopted that really work? I know, for example, I know talking to colleagues within children's social care, they were saying that actually embrace this within our team meetings. We talk about it in MI style and the supervision we have. We kind of use MI within that supervision.
Yeah.
Is that the sort of thing that you see really helps to embed it across as a culture? Yeah,
I think it does. I think what's really lovely is when I hear people being creative within their teams, it feels much more effective for me to say, well, what do you think would work for your team? And people come up with ideas. And what's lovely is often when I'm on training, I'll hear people at breaks, especially if they're in the same team, they can say, oh, we could, we could do that, because I play games and things with people. We could look at a clip and think about how we talk about that as a team. That tends to work better because teams know their teams. I don't know their teams. They do. They know themselves better. But what is important is to keep it going, because we've talked about this, I know before, is invariably we tend to default back to business as usual if we don't keep it live, if we don't keep thinking about it. One organisation that I'm working with at the moment, they are contemplating a model where they are encouraging managers to have group supervision of their teams. And what will be challenging about that is almost they need somebody to just keep popping up and saying, stay MI in those little groups, because what we tend to default to if we're talking about, so say if a social worker brings a difficult case that they're working on, what we tend to default to is case supervision, where we start sort of problem solving, making suggestions. And in those sort of situations, you just need a little, person to pop up and say, stay MI. Because what we want to do is allow the person to listen to themselves talking about that case, because they are the expert on that case. No one else in the room's probably met that person. And only to offer suggestions, the person really needs it, because we know we can do that in MI, but often we overestimate how much somebody needs our expertise to reach that point where they go, I think I know what I need to do. And it's that moment that I'm always continually amazed by. We trust the process, that people are their own expert, and they will often come up with ideas that they're more likely to enact because they came up with them.
It's really interesting you say that. Actually, as you were talking, I was sort of popping into my head some group supervisions that I've run previously, and actually, when I reflect back on it, it was exactly as you said. It was okay. Joe Bloggs is bringing this along from the team. They're really stuck.
Yeah.
Talk about it for a moment. Okay, open to the floor. What ideas have people got? And it was literally as a
load of suggestions
as a team going, oh, well, have you tried this? Because I did this with the family and that worked really well. And they're like, okay, yeah, thanks. I'll try that. And it was really actually inviting that. Yeah. What solutions have people got for this?
Right. And what did you notice about that? I mean, I'm just curious to know if you noticed that the recipient kind of yes-butted some of those suggestions.
I don't. From memory, I don't think we had so much of that. A little bit of that, actually, in hindsight. But I think often it was more of a developing a sense of camaraderie, I guess, of kind of like, oh, actually, yeah, we understand.
Yeah,
well,
that's happened to me
That's
too.
happened to me.
Yeah.
Oh, here you go. Well, we've tried this. How about
Why
that?
don't you try it?
That's great. Thanks. Yeah, I'll give that a go.
Yeah.
Whether it was that effective,
Whether they tried it.
That's another matter.
So it is in that situation as well. It sounds like you're also thinking in that dynamic, it's quite hard for the person to reject the idea openly.
Yeah, absolutely.
But might then try it in a half-hearted way and say it didn't work, or, that. So it's an interesting one, isn't it? But it's not that we can't offer our advice if someone really needs it.
Yeah.
But it's kind of trusting that process of sitting back and saying, well, what are you thinking?
Yeah.
And allowing that person the space to hear themselves process and talk aloud what they're thinking. That feels really different to just sitting at your desk with it going around in your head. There's something I think that we underestimate about the value of hearing ourselves talk aloud about something that's bothering us.
Yeah. That obviously is great if you're working within a team and you've got people around you facing similar situations, may have done MI training as well themselves and understand that. I'm conscious as well that there are a lot of people out there listening to this who actually are working in quite a lot of isolation and haven't got that team around them and may have come on the training as an individual, but actually they are sort of looking to embed that and really put that into their practice. And have you got any sort of suggestions around that if somebody is working in more of an isolated situation?
The interesting thing is that we know that even if one person uses this kind of approach with an individual, it is still likely to have an impact. What you tend to find is that individual will really appreciate the person who's using the MI's approach and will tend to gravitate towards them and respond to them. Often in meetings, so an example that readily comes to mind is someone I know who's been using MI for a long, long time, who used to work in an educational setting, so working with people who weren't attending school. And often in these meetings where there were educators there and the parents and the young person very often, the person I'm thinking of would use an MI approach in that meeting. And afterwards, what she told me was that other people in the meeting would often come to her and say, "What were you doing there? We noticed it really worked." And they wanted to know about it. They wanted to know about the approach, because often we don't know that what we're doing is problem solving, and we're not necessarily aware that our response is being pushed back on. And that, as we know from an MI perspective, if someone's pushing back, they are arguing against change and making change less likely. So there's something about noticing and knowing that can be incredibly useful, just that small bit of knowledge. So stopping doing what is automatic, because it's automatic to try and persuade somebody, isn't it, to make change?
Like we talked about that. I think we talked about the nail in the head. If it's obvious to you.
Yeah. You want to tell, you obviously want to help someone. It's driven from a very good place of wanting to try and make things better for somebody. And then we know, though, that it often has the opposite effect of what we're looking for. And that can be quite a challenging thing for people to think about, because especially if it's, we recognise actually, oh yeah, I think I've been doing that. That can be very challenging for people. But just a small change like that, being conscious of it and almost sitting on your hands and doing less. I think some people think they're not doing enough if they're doing less, but actually it might be more helpful for the individual to slow down and do less.
Yeah. So that self-reflection, if you are working in isolation, that self-reflection and consciousness, I guess, about what you're doing, what you're saying. Being aware.
And what you tend to find is people will notice. So certainly, if you're working in a communal space, often people will notice what you're doing. They'll hear you doing something different. I've had people on training or in development groups say to me, it's like, oh, people are noticing this, they're noticing what I'm doing. And then it catches, almost a bit like us saying that it's a top-down thing. If you're having supervision with a manager who's trying to use an MI approach in supervision, it's not them saying to you, you need to use MI. Them using MI and an MI approach with you, you sort of think, oh, that was nice being listened to. That was really helpful. Almost without thinking about it, then you want to be like that with your service users. So it catches.
So what would you say are some of the sort of sticking points, if you like, of people, if you've got somebody, again, they've done the training, really looking to embrace it, really looking to embed into practice. What are some of the sort of stumbling points you kind of see in people not really being able to achieve that?
Well, let me put that back to you. Since you've learned MI, what's helped you?
You're such an MI coach, aren't you? What helped me? Okay. I guess, and just for context, I went on Jackie's 3-day motivational interviewing course 4 years or so ago now. And I think what made the difference for me, first of all, similar to as you said, for me, it was that light bulb moment of just going, actually, this makes a lot of sense in terms of what I've seen in myself or people that I've line managed in practice. And the number of supervisions that I've conducted with people where they've sat there and said, I'm just really stuck with this. I went along and I've suggested X, Y, and Z, and it's, they've bounced it back on me, said, oh, I've done that, I've tried that, that doesn't work, and that, and just, and so from my experience of having those supervisions with people, and I see this in training that I deliver now, people saying that's great, but in practice, this is the reality of it. So for me to start off with, it was that moment of going, actually, this makes a lot of sense. I think secondly, it was just being very conscious about it, because for me, I find it's so easy to slip back into the common ways of working, the comfortable ways of working that you've spent years developing in practice, being told that's what you should develop in practice. Thinking on your feet and coming up with solutions and coming up with ideas. And so it's very easy to do that, to slip back into that, particularly where you have somebody who is maybe in supervision inviting that from you.
Yeah,
saying, I'm
actually
stuck.
asking, and you sort of literally, almost taking it literally that they want your advice.
And I always remember a supervision, quite a challenging supervision I had with somebody once, where I was trying to get them to reflect, and this is before I did the MI training, trying to get them to reflect. And they were saying, well, I don't know. How should I know that? And you tell me, you're the manager. So it was very
quite irritated with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I was then trying to sort of say, well, trying to push it back and say, what you know them. What do you think? Well, I don't know. You tell me. So there is that pressure to kind of have those solutions, and you find that from clients who work with as well.
Exactly the same.
Yeah. You walk in, and again, lost count of how many times I walked in.
You're the social worker. You tell me.
Yeah, excellent. You're here to solve things.
As you sort of talked about that, Steve, what strikes me though is your willingness to reflect. So as you talked about that light bulb moment for you, that would have been much harder for you if you weren't already conscious of the sort of examples you've given there, that you were already thinking, this doesn't feel like it's quite the right thing.
And it's that openness, sorry to interrupt, but that openness to doing things differently and challenging yourself.
Absolutely. Feeling, that there may be a different way here.
Yeah. No,
so
definitely. Openness
then for you, self-reflection, getting it, understanding it seems important as well. That moment where you think, I think I grasp the basic concept here.
Yeah, and I think the other thing for me as well is when I've been looking to adopt an MI style, recognise you don't always get it right, and that's okay.
That is okay.
And reflecting on that as well, those times where you come away and go, I thought I did everything all right there, but it didn't go right. It didn't go how I thought it was going to go. And then just coming away from it afterwards and going, actually, hang on, okay, let me almost sort of dissect that in my head. How did that conversation go? What happened?
What did I say?
And then suddenly going, hang on.
There you go.
At this point, the conversation turned, and actually that's when I kind of lost control, if you like, of that.
I think that what you've just described there as well is absolutely fundamental in MI, is you weren't blaming the person you were talking to for how the conversation went. You were thinking about your impact. And that's so fundamental. It's like, clearly we're going to work with difficult people. There's no getting away from that. And you know what? It's okay to talk about that. At the same time, even our most difficult and challenging conversations in MI, we're always thinking, okay, what can I do here? Rather than, and that can have a really important impact on what the person says next.
I think the other thing I'm quite keen to touch on as well is something, again, I think we've briefly talked about previously, is sometimes there's that real pressure from organisations to kind of get those results. Do you find that in the work that you do, that sort of conflict sometimes between that perception of MI being too slow, too long-winded, and actually it's nice that you're wanting to do this, but we really need to get involved. You need to get your action plan together. You need to start seeing results, all that kind of thing. Do you see that real sort of pressure between the two?
It comes up every training I do. That, well, you said it before, this is all very nice, but almost feeling like this is too slow. I just need to get on with things. And this is a really interesting thing. And I've thought about this such a lot, because often when we are under time pressure to get an outcome, we stop listening and we just go into problem solving mode. And that can take longer, because when someone doesn't feel heard, they keep dragging the listener back to that. No, but let me tell you. There's people will want to feel understood. And if we're coming up with an action plan for somebody that they're not ready for, we're getting ahead of their readiness for action, for a plan, the chances of them doing it. And then we just keep going over that plan. So if people are aware of MI, we're rushing, we're not even bothering too much with the engaging, we're rushing straight to planning. We're not doing any of that bit in between of evoking their motivation for change. We're just going straight to action. So we can find it takes a lot longer because of that. But there's something about kind of it feeling slower that people sometimes get a bit panicky about. So we say in MI, slow down to speed up. If we just slow down a bit, especially near the start, and we really listen and understand, because what we're doing is that person understanding themselves more, we find that we make better progress, that the person is more ready to get there because we've taken a bit more time. And sometimes I'm quite surprised when people say things like, I've only got 16 weeks. And I'm thinking, that's a long time. That's a long time if we're truly listening, but that can make us panic. I've only got 16 weeks, so I need to get on with it. And that takes us ahead of the person, and we could spend that 16 weeks in a resistant kind of conversation with somebody, with us trying to argue for the change and them telling us why they've tried and it didn't work. That could take longer than taking a bit more time at the start. So, yeah, a lot of the early evidence base for MI was based on 2 conversations. It's a brief intervention. It's not something that takes years.
And that's the thing, isn't it? I think, people can see it as, again, I think part of it is it's just a different way of working. And actually, like you're saying, okay, getting an action plan together, that's great.
Makes you feel better.
Makes me feel better because I've got my action plan.
Got something written down.
I can go into supervision and go, here you go, here's my plan, this is what I'm doing, this is my clarity of work. And that perception that by using MI, like say, it can take a long time, and actually I can't come along to my next supervision and say, here's my wonderful plan, this sort of thing. So that perception that it seems like a long-winded process. But I know from talking to practitioners all the time, they might have been involved with a family for 6 months, 8 months, 12 months, 2 years sometimes.
Really, yeah.
And completely stuck and going, I don't know what to do anymore. I've been involved for ages. We've done this, this and this and this. Yeah. Things haven't really, they haven't got any worse, but they haven't got any better. I just don't know what to do anymore. And sometimes when you look at those situations, sometimes you look at it and think, well, that's because you're over here somewhere. And actually, if you'd taken that bit of time to assess what the situation was, to understand, to listen,
yes,
actually, you'd be right over here doing this work over here, as opposed to off on a complete tangent over here for the last 2 years sometimes.
Absolutely.
And actually, that long-term time saving, I think, can't be underestimated.
So, exactly. So it's kind of almost turning it on its head and saying, this approach saves you time. But that's quite hard when you're under pressure to get on with it, which is why it comes back to our managers need to be doing it too. So they don't just say, where's your plan? Because you can still have a plan, but in MI, the plan might be something like Mr. Smith has agreed to think more about his approach to parenting before our next session. That might be your plan.
Yeah.
Rather than Mr. Smith will go to a parenting course and he will do this and he'll go there and whatever, before Mr. Smith is ready to do it.
Yeah, yeah. And do you find as well, we talked a little bit before about those kind of personal pressures.
Yeah, that internal pressure, that drive. Yeah.
You talked about sort of active listening, referred to that a moment again. And do you find that internal pressure can get in the way of that active listening as well?
Absolutely, of course it can, yeah. There are lots of things that get in the way of our listening. One of them is pressure of time. I've just got to get on with it. And it's all those voices in our head, if you like, that get in the way of really good, in the moment, mindful listening. Because it takes us back to what I said at the start, is if you really pay attention to what the person is saying, they are your teacher. They will tell you what's happening if you're really paying attention. And that will help you to get better at complex reflections as well, which is so important in MI. You're thinking not, oh, what could I suggest here? Or, oh, I really need to get onto the plan. Or, oh, that happened to me and I think This is what I did when I was in that situation. If you're really conscious of those things and you can just bracket them off and come back, what has this person just said? So when your supervisee was saying, well, you tell me, you're the manager, they weren't really saying they wanted you to tell them, were they? They were saying, they're annoyed with you for putting them under pressure and they're at the end of their tether, and they're lost to know what to do next. And that would inform your reflection to come alongside and think about that engaging part before you go to what could you do, which is the planning part.
Yeah. It's funny. We have this myth that humans are good at multitasking.
Yeah.
We're awful at multitasking.
It's a hard thing to do.
It is. And like I say, if you're talking to somebody and in your head, you suddenly go, you latch on to something they've said, and in your head you go, great, this is what I need to say next, or this is what I need to ask next. You hold that.
We're just waiting to speak then, aren't we, rather than listening.
And everything else you kind of tune out to because you're trying to hold on to that bit in your head. Yeah,
you're worried you're going to lose it. So you focus on that and you look like you're listening, but you're not really. You're
nodding and smiling, but the whole time you're holding on to that.
Yeah. And there is a sense of, listening and holding on to certain things in MI. That's part of what we do, especially if we're listening for change talk. And there is an anxiety, I think, sometimes for people that they're not going to be able to hold on to those things, like the change talk, and be able to guide the conversation back in that direction. But that just, it does come with practice. It does come the more you.
I think for me personally, that's probably the hardest bit for me is, like you say, active listening. Yeah, for me, you're almost kind of working on two levels when you're having an MI conversation. You are in the moment.
Yeah.
You're focused, you're active listening, but at the same time, there's also another part of your brain going, okay, right, there's some change talk, or
you're sorting through.
Yeah. And I think for me, that's one of the challenging parts of MI is almost having that sort of duality as part of the conversation.
Absolutely.
And I think sometimes that maybe goes back to what you said at the start of this episode, where people might come along going, oh, well, I do this already. You might be a good active listener. You might be good at reflections, what have you. But for me, that's the really challenging bit is being in the moment, but being conscious and aware and being able to use the techniques alongside that.
Yeah. No, that's sorting through, listening and sorting through. That is quite a hard thing to do, but it does come with practice.
And in terms of sort of learning MI then, what would you sort of say are the kind of stages of it, if you like?
Well, they've even researched this, to be honest. So often in sort of more advanced training, I might even refer to this actually, but there's an article by Bill Miller and Teresa Moyers on how people learn motivational interviewing. The first stage 1 and stage 2. So the first stage is being in the spirit of MI. So if people have had any training, they'll be aware that how you almost set your intention for the conversation. So you're not the expert, you're not being confrontational, judgmental. You're going to really listen to what the person says and evoke from them their ideas, all those things, those principles.
We kind of talked about that in our first episode, I think, didn't we?
Yeah, those things are really important. But stage 2 of learning is mastering the listening skills, the oars. And actually, those two merge a little bit. So often, if people are practicing the listening skills, especially if they're thinking about reflecting more rather than asking lots of questions, and if they're thinking about affirming, really actively looking for things to affirm, all those kind of listening skills will help you be in the spirit. But they're the first 2 stages that actually form the foundation for learning MI. Some people have those.
Could you just remind us again about oars?
Yeah. So open questions, affirmations, reflective listening, and summarising.
Great, thank you.
We use a lot of acronyms, don't we?
We love them.
Yeah. So those are the foundation, really. So being in the spirit of MI, learning the active listening skills. Now, some people have got those already. But if they haven't, that would be the best place to start, because on an MI training course, even if it's the 1-day course, you learn more than just that. Otherwise, you'd be thinking, why have I come here? I know all about this already. But after that, it's the sorting through that you're talking about. What is it that you're guiding the person towards? So you're not just doing a counselling session. You're not just listening actively. You're listening out for change talk. So the next thing is, can you spot it? So listening, great. Being in the spirit, then so what? So what is it you're listening for? So listening out for change talk, being able to respond to change talk. So not just listening for it, but how can you grow it? So another acronym people might be aware of is EARS. So that's still oars, but once we get to the kind of change talk, the E stands for elaboration. So that is where we are. If I've heard change talk, such as, well, I guess I'd feel a bit better if I did a bit of exercise. Instead of just going on to, well, how could you do that? I want to elaborate. So I might say, in what way better? So not for my benefit, for their, well, what do I mean by better? That sense of going in and thinking about their motivation for saying better. It might be a pretty rubbish bit of change talk. How do you develop it? So I know we've got an episode on change, so I won't go too much on that. So recognizing it, responding to it, knowing how to respond where the person pushes back. So that's the next bit, and that can be really tricky. And it's a bit of a nuance, really, this sense of it being a dance, where sometimes it's great and we're cooking on gas and we're hearing nice change talk, the person's engaged. But actually, how do you respond when the person is not happy, either about the conversation or you, or the subject matter, or is telling you all the reasons they can't do it or won't do it? So what do you do in those situations? So that's what we used to call rolling with resistance, but we now call dancing with discord. So that's another element of learning. And then moving forward is, how do you move from all this lovely change talk and reducing sustained talk to actually activation of the change? So moving from talking about why to how. So that's the bit about how you are developing a plan with the person. The last stage to learning MI is being conscious about when you're doing it and when you're doing another approach. Because we know lots of other approaches are effective. So, for example, if I was working with somebody with depression, we know that other approaches have a better evidence base than MI for working with depression. So like behaviour activation or CBT, for example. So if a therapist or a worker is aware of other approaches that are more helpful for specific presentations, it's important for the person to know when they're using MI and when they're using the other approach, so they can switch between the two. So it doesn't become diluted. Because MI, as you can imagine, could be really helpful working with somebody with an approach like behaviour activation or CBT, which demands quite a lot of work from the person outside of the session, like doing the homework, and their motivation might wane. So rather than just going over the exercises again, as if they're ready for that, the therapist or worker might switch to an MI approach to have a conversation about motivation to do the exercise.
Yeah, because just as you were talking through that, I was thinking to myself, actually, that there are a few real sort of challenges with this. I talked about that kind of duality as you were thinking and that open, active listening, but also those kind of stages within that can be really challenging for people in different ways. And like you say, with that rolling with resistance, and it used to be called, the dancing with discord as it is now, can feel a real challenge, isn't it? If actually somebody's pushing back against being that urge to push back.
Yeah, definitely. And to feel defensive ourselves at times.
Absolutely. And then there is that skill to move the conversation forward. Yeah. At what point do you do that? And sometimes, I think we've talked about this before, sometimes going, okay, we'll move on to this stage now. And then that doesn't quite work, and feeling okay, going, okay, let's go back a little bit here. We're not ready for that.
Feeling okay about sort of always, I think you described it beautifully there, actually, Steve, but that sense of trying always to move forward and being prepared to move back if we need to. So we're not just staying here waiting for the person to do it. We're always trying to guide it forward. The momentum in MI is always thinking, where am I going? Where am I going? Where am I going? And being prepared to be responsive if we need to and move back, and seeing that as equally important to respond when there's pushback, equally important to the process. So we're sort of doing this dance. And I have this slide in my mind that I use sometimes is, which way am I leaning? Am I leaning into the change talk? Great, I'm moving forward, lovely, lovely. Or is there now some pushback, lots of sustained talk, discord? Do I need to lean that way now? And in a way, you're just coming back to the relationship, the engaging. And that's quite a hard thing to learn to do. But the lovely thing about MI, I've said it a couple of times already, is if you're really paying attention to how the person's responding to your approach, they will tell you what needs to happen. Because what tends to happen is if you haven't responded enough to the discord or the sustained talk, they keep saying it. You know, it's like it's not resolved. That would give you a message that they don't feel you've heard it. You don't feel you've acknowledged it enough. So it's kind of leaning into that enough. And then at what point do you say, okay, actually, how do I then try and move it forward? Because you can't keep, some people would be angry all day, wouldn't they? There's a point at which you need to say, so is it okay if we now talk about X and you are deliberately guiding it forward as the lead dancer and not just following them? So there's that balance of following and guiding that we kind of, you know, we kind of work interchangeably with those.
And just to kind of round things off then, and if we imagine somebody's interested in coming on a course, or they've been on one of your courses, and going, great, where do I go with this next? Have you got any sort of tips for them to help to really carry it forward?
I think listening to a podcast is quite a good idea.
Of course.
Yeah. So, well, actually, this podcast people have told me they find really useful because they can listen at their own speed and, you know, have it on in the car. That sort of almost immersion can be a helpful thing. Not everyone likes podcasts, but hopefully they do if they're listening to this. Reading, for me, that is my number one thing, is to read, so I can read at my own pace. I can annotate things. I can go back to it. I do love a book in my hand, and really get to grips with something. If
you could recommend one, what would you?
One book, I think, snappy title, Motivational Interviewing by Miller and Rolnick. Either the newest edition, which is 2023, or the third edition as well, 2013. Those two books are excellent. They're really easy to read. And yeah, so those would be my kind of go-to books, really. Clips. So there's a website that people can access for free where you can go to clips through there, much better than just going through YouTube. And so that's motivationalinterviewing.org. And if you look at other resources, under other resources, you'll see YouTube clips. And so there's lots and lots of YouTube clips on that website. So motivationalinterviewing.org, other resources, YouTube clips. So reading, clips, podcasts. But the most important thing is give it a go. Because really, what harm can you do? You're giving someone a good listening to. And most of the time, people don't spot that you're doing something different. They appreciate being listened to.
Perfect. Well, Jackie, thank you so much for that today. As always, it's great to talk to you and really sort of pick this subject apart. Just for everyone listening here, Jackie and I were talking about sort of another episode, and Jackie is up for a challenge, and she's asked us to pose questions to her. So we've got at the moment, I'll pop this in the description for the episode. We've got a survey out at the moment, and thank you for those of you who have responded already. But if you've got a question on motivational interviewing that you want to put to Jackie, it can be absolutely anything. We've thrown the doors open for it, and we will go through them. I can't guarantee we've got a chance to answer all of the questions that come into us, but we will try and answer as many as possible, and we won't shy away from any tricky subjects. So if you have got a question to pose to Jackie, anything at all in relation to MI, obviously, please send them in to us, because we want to hear from you, and I will fire those questions at Jackie and see what we come up with.
It'll be interesting, wouldn't it?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. So
that'd be good to hear.
Definitely. And thank you again, Jackie, for your time. And just a reminder for everybody, we've still got the one-day Introduction to Motivational Interviewing training, which is absolutely free to attend with Jackie, which is a real opportunity. So do join us for that one. It's a brilliant workshop. I say you're not going to come out from it as an expert, but it will certainly sort of open your eyes around MI and the opportunities for it. And if you listen to this podcast, it'll give you a really good sort of footing to go into that as well. The other thing that we've been talking about recently is that a few times people have come off of that one-day course and said, it's great, but I really want to want more, want to get with more, which is great. So just to let everybody know that at the moment, I can't guarantee how long it'll last, but at the moment we've been working with our colleagues in Children's Social Care who do run a 3-day MI course, and they have agreed to open up a few spaces per course for wider practitioners as well. So we have currently got that going. There is a charge for it. It's only £100 for 3 days in total, so only 33 quid a day, which is an absolute bargain.
Cheap as chips.
Absolutely. So do come along to that. It's a really good opportunity to go into things in much more depth. If you've done the one day already, that's fine.
That will be a lovely foundation.
But if you haven't, don't worry about it. You can go around to that 3-day as it is. But so do come along to that as well, because it's a really, really good opportunity to work with other colleagues to really get into much, much more depth and more practice, I think.
Yes, definitely. Oh, on 3 days, I'm afraid there's more practice.
But don't be shy of that. It's good.
It's all fun.
For anybody that goes into panic attacks when they hear the word role play, it's not role play.
No.
It's just some really good opportunities
Tiny
to practice.
little bits of practice, but I won't make anybody do anything they don't want to do.
Perfect. Well, Jackie, as always, thanks so much for joining me. It's been great to talk to you again and catch up.
And you.
And we will speak again soon.
We will. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks a lot. Take care. Bye. Well, I hope that today's episode has really helped to gain a better understanding on MI and, importantly, how most effectively to begin learning it. Now, just a quick reminder, if this has sparked your enthusiasm to find out more, then Jackie is running the one-day Introduction to MI course, which is fully subsidised for all Somerset agencies. And that's available to everybody, apart from colleagues from Children's Social Care who undertake the more intensive 3-day MI training. Now, as we mentioned in that episode, I'm really pleased to say that colleagues from Children's Social Care have very kindly opened up a few spaces per course for multi-agency partners to come and join them as well. So if you are interested in that, please do have a look at the SSCP training page. And I'll pop a link in the description for those training events that are taking place. Now, as I mentioned in today's podcast, the next episode we're going to be doing with Jackie is your opportunity to post your MI questions to her. So if you've got any burning questions about how to learn it, about the ethics of it, about some of the techniques of it, whatever you like in relation to MI, do send those in to us. And I'll pop a link to the survey that we've got online to be able to post your question to her in the description for today's episode. Or alternatively, if you want to get in touch with us for a question with Jackie or any other questions or comments arising from today's episode, or would like to be involved in future episodes, we'd love you to get in touch with us at theppod@somerset.gov.uk. Once again, I'd like to give a huge thank you to my guest today, Jackie Webb, MI trainer, and of course, as always, I'd like to thank you for listening. My name is Steve Maccabee, and I'm the training manager for the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership, and I look forward to you joining us again next time at the ThePPod.
Let's work together to help keep children safe.